It's everyone's favorite day of the week. It's time for the Parsha podcast. When I spoke to you last week, it was on Sunday, and the hostages had not quite come home. But of course, all of our hearts rejoiced when all the living hostages were able to be reunited with their families. It's a miracle. There's no other words to describe it. I did not think it would happen. I never thought that Hamas would forfeit their greatest asset, if you will, their greatest piece of leverage, and they returned all of the hostages, the living ones, back to their families. These people suffered so much, spending 2 years in the pits of despair, in hell on earth, in the tunnels of Gaza, and now they're reunited with their families. What an amazing miracle, and it's so important, of course, for us to be thankful. Of course, our nation suffered a lot over the last 2 years, but the joy of knowing that at least all the living hostages are no longer in Gaza, it's something that we really have to thank God for. And I will tell you, I was very struck by something that happened last week. As you know, the leader of the free world, as he is known, the most powerful man of the world, the President of the United States, actually went to Jerusalem last week and actually spoke in the Knesset. And it was a long, rambling, typical speech for him. But there was something that struck me about what he said that was just so powerful. He started off his speech. I don't know if you picked this up. I don't know if you even heard the speech. He started off his speech, and he said, it's a great day. We have to thank Almighty God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's what the American president in Jerusalem, that's how he started off his speech. We have to thank the Almighty God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I don't remember any politician, certainly not any American politician, speaking like that. We have to thank Almighty God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I thought it was such a sanctification of God, the most powerful man of the world, going to Jerusalem, speaking in the Israeli parliament, and starting off his speech by saying, we have to thank the Almighty God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when I heard that, it reminded me of something that I read many years ago that my grandfather wrote, and I couldn't find it. I don't remember where it was, and I did a lot of searching, and I found it, where he talks about how powerful it is when leaders, when kings, when presidents, when prime ministers, when they publicly acknowledge and thank God. And I found it, and I want to share with you what he writes. He cites the Talmud in the book of Sanhedrin. The Talmud is talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Now, who's Nebuchadnezzar? He's the king of the Babylonians who destroyed the first temple. So he's a villain, but he was effectively the ruler of the entire world. And the Talmud gives us the spiritual backstory of how this person, Nebuchadnezzar, became king of the world. And the Talmud says that he ran 4 steps. He ran 4 steps to honor God. And as a result of that, he got all that honor and splendor and glory. And it tells the story that Nebuchadnezzar, he was a page boy. He was a hired man. He was a scribe for the king of Babylonia. Baladan, son of Baladan, king of Babylonia. And this king of Babylonia was writing a letter to Chizkiah, to Hezekiah, king of Israel, king of Judah. Hezekiah was sick and recovered, and the Babylonian king wrote a letter to the Jewish king, to the king of Judah, in honor of his recovery. And the Talmud explains why he did that. Like, why would the Babylonian king write a letter to the Judean king? It tells a whole story about how the son the sun prematurely set when Hezekiah's father, who was wicked, died. And then when Hezekiah was ill, the sun shone extra long. And they wanted to write a letter of greetings, of well wishes to King Hezekiah. And the scribes of the Babylonian king, they wrote to him as follows. Shalom lemalka Chizkiah, peace to you, King Chizkiah. Shalom lekarta Yerushalayim, peace to the city of Jerusalem. And shalom, peace, le'elaka Rabbah, to the great God. That's how I guess they started the letter. And Nebuchadnezzar, he was a scribe. He was a hired hand. He was part of the staff, if you will, of the king. And he wasn't there when they were drafting the letter. And he gets back and he says, well, what did you write? And they told him, we wrote, greetings to you, King Chizkiah, Hezekiah, greetings to the city of Jerusalem, and greetings to the great God. And he says, wait a minute, great God? And you're putting him last? First you say, greetings to King Chizkiah, Hezekiah, and then to the city of Jerusalem, and only then to the great God? You have to switch it. You have to reverse it. God has to go first. But they said, well, we got a problem. Because the letter has already been sent. It's been dispatched. The courier is on the way to Judea. So he started running. Nebuchadnezzar, the scribe, is running after the messenger to go extract the letter or to go reclaim the letter and to amend it to put God first. And the Talmud says he ran 4 steps. And the angel Gabriel, stopped him in his tracks. Because what Nebuchadnezzar, a wicked man, a brutal, barbarous villain, he was standing up for the honor of God. And he took 4 steps to advance the honor of God. And in that merit, he got all of his glory. And he became king of the world. And had he succeeded in getting back the letter and amending it, then he would have actually succeeded in destroying the entire Jewish people. And therefore, the angel had to stop him because he was standing up for God's honor. This was Nebuchadnezzar before he became king, and in this merit, he became a king on the entire world. And this is just an amazing thing. If someone as wicked as this, who did something as trivial as this, namely just taking 4 steps to advance the honor of God, he got such reward, just imagine how much reward the righteous would get for standing up for God and for advancing the honor and the glory and the splendor of God. And then that's the Talmud that my grandfather cites in his writings. And then he has in parentheses, he wrote that once the foreign secretary in Israel, the foreign minister in Israel, they asked him, why don't you mention God when you speak in the United Nations? You're the representative of the Jewish state. What are we? We're the people of God. Why don't you mention that when you speak at the United Nations General Assembly? And he responded, we don't do that. We don't mix business and pleasure. We don't mix our religion and our matters of state. And then my grandfather writes this, and this is what I remembered. I must have read this certainly more than a decade ago, but I remembered this point. He writes like this. If a prime minister would unabashedly mention God and thank God in the Knesset and in the United Nations, even if he was a sinner that caused many others to sin in the past, there's no telling how much divine aid he will have in that merit. Because if Nebuchadnezzar, the wicked, the brutal, the tyrant, if he merited so much reward for standing up for God's honor, all the more so would someone who's not that wicked. And then my grandfather adds another point. And again, this is what he writes. Even if King Messiah he will not succeed in bringing, but in all of his steps and all of his actions, you will see divine aid. And that will be the sign that he did something to advance the honor of God. And to me, this was, I never heard something like this before. I never heard someone publicly, a leader, much less the leader of the free world as it's known, the most powerful person in the world, going to Jerusalem and saying publicly, first things we have to thank Almighty God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I was thinking this is just a lesson for us. We certainly have to thank God, Almighty God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was a wonderful week, and we hope that the good times continue and the bad times end. And this year, please God, will bring only blessing and happiness and goodness to all of our people and to the entire world. But now it's time for the Parsha podcast, and it's Parshas Noach. We are back, please God, for another year of Parsha podcast live on torchzoom.com. We're doing it this year at 6 p.m. Central, and it's Parshas Noach, always one of the highlights of the Parsha cycle. We read about Noah and the flood, and Noah was righteous, of course, in his generation. He was a tzaddik. In fact, he's the only person that I am aware of who is called a tzaddik, a righteous person in the Torah. And even though it seems pretty cut and dried, he's righteous. Our sages debate the extent of Noah's righteousness. According to one opinion, he was righteous bidorosav, only in proportion, only relative to his generation. If you compare him to the people of his generation, he's righteous, but what if you compared him to Abraham? Then he would not have amounted to much. That's one opinion. The second opinion says that he was righteous even in his corrupt and degenerate generation. Just imagine how much more righteous he would have been had he had someone like Abraham to be associated with. Our parsha begins with this verse: Noah was righteous in his generation, and the sages diverge quite dramatically into how to interpret that. But certainly everyone agrees that Noah's generation was wicked. They had become corrupt. They committed the worst, most grievous sins, idolatry, promiscuity. But their fate was sealed because of chamas, because of theft, because of robbery. And God appears to Noah: you're righteous in this generation. Everyone else is wicked. I'm going to destroy the world, and I want you to build a large boat, 300 amos cubits by 50 by 30. Make compartments for all the animals and all the food, because I'm going to be destroying the world and starting over with just you. And Noah spent many years, 120 years, according to our sages, building this ark and its time, and all the inhabitants, all the occupants of the ark are assembled. Who's going to be on this massive floating menagerie? There are 8 people: Noah and his wife Naamah, Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Yafes, and their wives, and all the food, and all the animals, a pair of every species, and 7 pairs of kosher animals. And the reason for that is because after the flood, Noah intends on bringing sacrifices, and they enter the ark, and it starts to rain 40 days and 40 nights of intense rain, and then 150 more days of swelling and intensification of the rain. And ultimately, Noah and co spend an entire year on the ark, from the 17th day of the month of Cheshvan to the 27th day of that same month. The following year, our lunar year is 354 days plus 11 days, meaning a total of 365 days, an entire year on the boat. It's time to leave the boat. He sends out the birds, first the raven, then the dove once, and then the dove a second time, and he returns with an olive branch. And finally, Noah leaves the ark with his wife, with his sons, and with his daughters-in-law, and all the animals leave, and they find a devastated world. You imagine what it looked like. The remains of all flesh is strewn about. The world is empty and desolate. It's almost like Genesis all over again. And Noah builds an altar and offers sacrifices to God. And God commits to never curse humanity with a flood-like event again. And God blesses humanity. And there's the covenant of the rainbow. That's the sign that God will never again destroy all flesh with a flood. And we have that sordid episode after the flood. Noah plants the vine. He drinks, becomes drunk. He is violated by his son Ham. And he's covered and has his dignity restored by his two other sons. And Noah emerges from his stupor and he pieces together what happened and he curses Ham and Ham's son Canaan. And the Parsha ends. There's the delineation of the various descendants of Noah and his sons. We read about the Tower of Babel episode. Humanity conspired against God and were scattered and were balkanized. And the Parsha ends with a line of Shem, son of Noah, 10 generations from Noah to Abraham, then known as Abram. Just as Parshas Bereshis ends with 10 generations from Adam to Noah, we have now 10 generations from Noah to Abram. And at the very end of the Parsha, we read about the family of Terach, father of Abraham, and their voyage. They're traveling to Canaan, and they ultimately stop before they get there in a place called Haran. That's the Parsha. It's Parshas Noach, but it's year 10 of the Parsha podcast. And this year the theme is Parsha Backstage. And I spoke to the powers that be. We got a year-long pass. So let's dip behind the curtains. Let's see the hidden story, the story behind the story of this very interesting and provocative Parsha, Parshas Noach. Humanity became corrupt. All flesh became corrupt. It's time to start over, start from the beginning with a fresh start. And the solution is to destroy the whole world with water, specifically, and to have Noah, who's righteous, at least in that generation, and his family, they're going to spend an entire year in the ark. You imagine that if you wanted to reset all of humanity, there are simpler ways to do it. Our sages tell us that the waters of the flood were piping hot, and it melted the skin of civilization, of the people of civilization, off them. The waters, before they went down to earth, they took a little pit stop in purgatory, in hell. They got all heated up, they came, they destroyed, and you imagine that the destruction was very quick. There's 40 days of heavy rain. At the end of those 40 days, everything's destroyed, right? So why not end the whole experiment there? End the flood then. Why does Noah have to spend a whole year, 365 days, on this boat? You need to reset humanity, do it, and move on. The Talmud tells us, this is another way to ask a similar question. The Talmud tells us that there was one land that did not flood. The land of Israel, the Holy Land, the Promised Land, the Chosen Land. So if you want to destroy all of humanity, you want to cleanse, you want to hit the reset button, and you want Noah, he's righteous, him and his family, they should endure, they should survive, they should rebuild the world after the flood. Together with a representative sample of every animal, every species, every food, there's an easy solution. You simply bring Noah to the land of Israel, and you bring a sample of every species, and let the world flood over. Noah would be spared the difficult labor, 120 years of building the ark, and tending to the animals for an entire year. The ark was not a pleasant place. We may think of it as a cruise ship, big, sturdy, with lots of amenities. You could play cards and charge your room and go swimming and go fishing. That's not what it was. It was an entire year of tending to all the animals. Think about the smell, the awful effluvious stench of all the animals and all the sweaty people and all the insane work that they had to do. The Midrash records that Shem, also known as Malki Tzedek, he met Abraham, and he told Abraham that for the entire year that they were on the boat, on the ark, they didn't have a proper sleep. Yeah, of course, they dozed off here and there, but they never laid down and went to sleep in a proper fashion. And the reason is because they were completely swamped with work. They had to feed all the animals, and every animal had a different feeding schedule. Some in the middle of the night, and some in the afternoon, and some in the morning, and they're running around like madmen trying to tend to all the animals. Save Noah, save his family, save Shem, save all these people from that misery. Why did Noah have to spend a whole year on this very unpleasant, very miserable floating menagerie? Just imagine the noise, all the animals screeching, the smell, how unpleasant it was. You know, we like to go to the zoo on occasion. I happen to not like zoos. I'm against zoos. I say there's a problem with zoos because they make the humans do all the walking. But when we were in Canada now for the festival, we went to a safari. That's the way to do it. You stay in your car and all the animals come to you. It's great. This was like a boat safari, but it was packed to the gills, cramped and miserable for an entire year. And it was quite rocky. The Midrash tells us that the ark was always turning over. It was flipping and turning over like lentils in a boiling pot. Sloshing and swirling about, rocking about, with all the animals turning and tumbling over. Just imagine how unpleasant that would be. I'm not a big roller coaster guy. But even someone who likes roller coasters, you do it once, you wait in line at Disneyland for an hour, you get your 30-second thrill. But imagine you're there for a whole year. The animals screeching and the poor ventilation. You're working all the time. No sleep, very little light. 0 out of 10. Would not recommend. And the Midrash tells us that one of the sages, when observing or when discussing the ark, one of the sages said, if I was on the ark, I would have smashed it and escaped. It's better to die a quick death on the outside world than to be subjected to the abject misery inside its walls. And Noah was placed there for a year. Why? What's the deeper idea of why Noah and his family had to be there with all those animals, with all that work, with all that misery for an entire year in the ark? I want to share 2 ideas that I think qualify as being backstage insights. Humanity had become corrupted. There was corruption. There was universal, comprehensive corruption. All flesh was corrupt. And the Midrash tells us all flesh means not just the humans, even the animals. The animals began to cohabit with other species. The Midrash goes further and says that even the earth became corrupt. You plant wheat, it's a wheat field. Why? Why does wheat come out of planting wheat? Because that's the way the earth does. The earth just follows orders. You put in a certain seed and that species will grow. In the times of the flood, says the Midrash, the earth became corrupted. You plant wheat, you get something else. You get tulips. You get barley. You get a banana tree. the earth stopped following instructions. There was corruption that went so far as to even contaminate and impact the earth. And of course, this corruption was all the result of man, because man is the centerpiece of God's created world. And all of existence, all of created existence is affected by humanity. And humanity has the ability to influence everything around them for good and for bad. When we are righteous, we elevate and refine and uplift everything, the whole world, all of created existence. In the run-up to the flood, humanity became corrupted and dragged the entire creation down with them. This corruption just permeated everything. The animals were influenced, and the earth itself was also influenced. And there was a need to refresh it. There was corruption. There was spiritual corrosion. There was impurity that had just taken over everything. There's this one small bright spot of righteousness in the generation, Noah, and that's it. What happens when something or person is impure? What is the recipe, the prescription for someone who is impure? What's the Torah's way of remediating impurity? Well, that's done with immersion in water, with immersion in the mikvah. The world had become corrupt. Which part of the world? All of it. All flesh and the whole thing, the whole enterprise had become corrupt. There's no way that this can endure. So God put the entire world in a mikvah. And the waters covered everything, 15 cubits above the highest mountain top. 15, Kabbalists tell us, that's the Yud and the Hey, that's the name of God. This was a total cleansing of all of created existence. But the water was not enough. It's not enough to just go to the mikvah. The process of purification is also to change. There's a concept in the literature called going to the mikvah, but holding on to the impurity in your hand. Doesn't work, right? You're impure. You, let's say, touched one of the rodents that render something impure. And you say, I'm going to go to the mikvah, and you grab the rodent and you jump in the mikvah. It doesn't work. You cannot have the purification of the mikvah while you are still clutching and clinging to the impurity. There was spiritual impurity, and the water is not enough. The impurity has to be undone. The corruption has to be undone. There has to be purification. There has to be anti-corruption. Well, what was the corruption? Well, the Torah tells us. God told Noah, Timal'ah ha'aretz chamas, the land is filled with robbery, with theft. The generation was wicked and was guilty of a great many crimes against God. But what clinched their destruction was theft, we're told. Well, what's theft? Theft is when there's something that someone else owns, it belongs to them, and the thief snatches it. The thief takes what does not belong to them. If that's the essence of theft, what's the opposite of that? It's taking what you own and bestowing it and giving it to someone else. We call that kindness. The opposite of taking that belongs to someone else for myself, just by force, is taking something that belongs to me and bestowing it upon another. The way to fix the world, yes, you need the mikvah, but you also need to rebuild the world with a different way of living. The land was filled with robbery. Well, the land should be filled with the opposite, with kindness. So Noah was told, we're going to do this. We're going to have the water to cleanse the whole world, provided that you spend a year in very difficult circumstances doing what? Doing only kindness, only giving, non-stop giving. The world needs to be cleansed and purified with water, and simultaneously, Noah had to reestablish humanity as not a species of robbery, as a species of kindness, of giving, of anti-robbery, of anti-theft. So for a whole year, Noah did nothing but give. He had no life for himself, just dedication for those outside of him, for others, with self-sacrifice. It was not pleasant. If any one of us were there, we would have fled, jump out the window. Noah, with his year of kindness, was able to rebuild and reset the world properly on the foundations of kindness. Noah found favor in God's eyes. The Midrash tells us that people lived for a very long time, as we know, 900 years, 800 years. The people had very long lifespans, and they needed help. And you would have not just your parents, you have your grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-great-great-grandparents and so on. You have 7, 8 generations. This one is 895. This one is 754. Says the Midrash. Every person would say, listen, I'm taking care of my parents, and that's it. I got enough things to worry about. Noah was the only one who said, I want to take care of everyone. His father, his grandfather, great-grandfather, and so on. He was an exemplar of kindness. And God says, I want to choose you. You're going to be the one who's going to be saved, and you will spawn humanity anew. Humanity had fallen into a pattern of robbery, of selfishness. Noah, you're going to help me, so to speak, rebuild the world with kindness. Noah was indeed a paragon of kindness, and he spent an entire year reinforcing that kindness, doing nothing but benefiting others. He didn't even sleep for an entire year. Yeah, of course, they dozed off, nodded off like sailors. But it was an entire year of just giving. That is the way to reset the world and to start over properly. That's one idea. But with Noah, we always see competing ideas. He's called a tzaddik, and the sages say, well, is he really? Maybe only in his generation. There is a lot of literature that we have documenting all the flaws of Noah. Torah says he's righteous. That should be enough for everyone. But I say to say, no, it says righteous in his generation. He wasn't Abraham. Rashi cites the Midrash. Abraham was righteous on his own. He could stand up spiritually on his own. Noah needed a boost. He needed a crutch. The Midrash observes that Noah is called Noach ish tzaddik. He's a man who's righteous. And towards the end of the Parsha, he's called a ish adama, a man of the earth. When he planted those vineyards, he was a man of the earth. The Midrash observes that there's another person in the Torah who also is called Ish twice. And that's Moshe. After Moshe escapes Egypt, he goes to Midian and he rescues Jethro's daughters from the shepherds that were harassing them. And those daughters go to Jethro, why do you come back so fast? Well, an Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man, Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man saved us. And at the end of the Torah, Moshe is called an Ish Elokim, a man of God. This is the blessing, V'zos HaBracha, that Moshe, the man of God, bless the nation. So there are two people called Ish twice. And Noah starts off Ish Tzaddik. Look what happened to him. He was downgraded. He devolved into an Ish Adamah. Moshe, he was on an upward trajectory. He was an Ish Mitzrayim, an Egyptian man, and he ultimately became an Ish Elokim. So our sages are pointing all the flaws. Yeah, he's righteous in his generation. Not quite like Abraham. He's no Moshe. The Midrash even tells us something very interesting. This is even harsher, because none of us could feel like, we're no Abraham or Moshe ourselves. That's not such harsh criticism, but there's even more harsh criticism that our sages say about Noah. Noah's told to build a boat, and the dimensions and the type of wood, and it must have compartments. It wasn't just this big auditorium. There were different compartments. It was compartmentalized. What's the Hebrew word for compartments? So the Midrash tells us that the word that the Torah uses is kinim. Now, kinim with a chaf means lice. Kinim with a kuf means compartments. Now, there's a book of Mishnah called Maseches Kinim. The same word the Torah uses for compartments is a name of a book. And it's not about compartments. It's about birds. Specifically, the birds that a Metzora uses, that someone who has tsaras, that spiritual leprosy, the birds that they use for the purification process. Says the Midrash, why does the Torah use the word for compartments, the same exact word that refers to the small birds used in the purification process of a Metzora? Says the Midrash, Noah himself was contaminated, was impure like a Metzora. And that's why he was forced to go into exile away from society. That's already some biting criticism of Noah. But listen to this one. How long was Noah in the ark for? From the 17th day of the month of Cheshvan to the following year, the 27th day of that same month. Exactly a solar year. Says the Midrash, why was Noah condemned to spend a year in the ark? Because the ark was a floating, mobile purgatory. It was a decidedly unpleasant experience for all of its occupants. It was so unbearable that the sages testified, if I was there, I would just escape. It's better to die than to spend a year there. Tipping over with all the animals, sloshing and spinning all around. It was very difficult. And that's just the movement and all the noise, the screeching animals and the unbearable stench and the cramped, claustrophobic corridors and the endless work and the lack of sleep. It was hell on earth, hell on water. And no one needed it, says the Midrash. He needed to spend an entire year in purgatory as the wicked do. The maximum amount of time that someone can spend in purgatory is a year. And the reason why is because a year has 365 days. Why is the maximum that someone can spend in purgatory 365 days? Well, because there are 630 mitzvahs in the Torah. 248 of them are performative, positive mitzvahs, mitzvahs aseh, and 365 of them are restrictions, transgressions, prohibitions. Someone does all the sins in the world, every single one of them. They need 365 dimensions of purgatory. They need an entire year. 1 day per sin in hell. Says the Midrash, Noah was put in hell and water in hell on high water for 365 days because he was a totally wicked person, says the Midrash, or implies the Midrash. That's a very harsh assessment of Noah. How can we possibly say that about Noah? Noah's righteous, at least in his generation. We have an entirely different view, a perspective here on what the ark was. It was punishment for Noah. Yeah, he wasn't as wicked as the people that died, but he was deserving of 365 days in purgatory. And by the way, this week we're going to read in the shul, we're going to read Parshas Noach, and then the Haftorah, it talks about the flood as well, and it gives an unusual term for the flood. It calls it Mei Noach, the waters of Noach. Now we think that the boat is the boat of Noach. The waters is the waters for the sinners. The prophet tells us that the waters that destroyed all of humanity are attributable to Noah. So we're seeing in our sources very, very harsh criticism of Noah. And the Zohar tells us why. Noah was told by God, I will destroy the world. Build an ark. Make sure it's really waterproof, really sturdy, and you'll be protected. And Noah obeyed. And he spent 120 years building an ark. What did Noah not do? Noah did not pray. He did not take action to save humanity. Noah is compared to Abraham and to Moshe. Both Abraham and Moshe were put in a similar situation to Noah. Abraham was told, the sinners of Sodom and Gomorrah will be destroyed. And these were people that hated Abraham and everything he stood for. Nevertheless, Abraham launches into a prayer salvo. Maybe there are 50, maybe there are 45, maybe there are 40, 30, 20, maybe there are 10 people. Maybe we can find some way. Let's turn over every single stone to try to save these sinners. Now, Abraham tried, didn't succeed, even though one year, many years ago, we did a podcast that Abraham actually did succeed because with his prayer, he succeeded in sparing Lot. And Lot's salvation only came thanks to Abraham's prayer, and that ultimately led to the nations of Ammon and Moab. And of course, Ruth and David and all that are descendants of Lot. And thus, Abraham, with his prayer, it seems like it was a failure. It ultimately spawned Messiah. But at least the way it seems to us, Abraham tried everything he could, wasn't successful. But Moshe had an almost identical prophecy. The nation does the sin of the golden calf. And God tells Moshe, I am done with this nation. We're going to start over with you. Just as God told Noah, I am done with this species, with this world, and we'll start over with you. And what does Noah do? He builds a boat. And what does Moshe do? He launches into prayer. He doesn't accept it. And then he tells God, if you want to destroy them, you must destroy me. And the Kabbalists point out something unbelievable. Moshe tells God, if you're not willing to accept my prayer, you're not willing to accept my supplication, erase me from your book. How do you write the word erase me? In Hebrew, mecheni, erase me. 4 letters, memches nun yud, mecheni. That's the exact same word, or same letters, that the prophet uses for Mei Noach, the waters of Noach. Moshe's telling God, no. I'm not going to do what Noach did. I'm not going to make the same mistake. I'm not going to be like Noah. I'm not willing to accept it. No, I'm not going to build a boat. I'm going to save them. When told of an impending destruction, Noah built the boat. Abraham prayed relentlessly. Moshe prayed relentlessly. Noah built the boat. And to top it off, we see that Abraham prayed and he wasn't really successful. Maybe he was marginally successful, but he didn't spare the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Moshe was successful in his prayer. What would have happened if Noah would have prayed? So listen to this. Noah, I'll prove it to you. Noah could have saved all of humanity, all of that destruction, a whole year in the ark, countless people that were killed and animals that were killed, and just absolute devastation. All that could have been avoided if Noah prayed. How do we know this? Of course, our sages tell us. But Noah did eventually pray. Noah comes out of the ark, and he builds an altar, and he offers sacrifices. He takes those 7 pairs of kosher animals and brings them as sacrifices. And the verse tells us that God, so to speak, smelled the wafting aroma, the pleasant aroma, and pledged to not do another flood. Now you read this verse, this is in chapter 8, verse 21. God says, I'm not going to again curse the land with another flood. Ba'avur ha'adam, because of Adam, because of man. Why? Because, continues the verse, because the inclination of the heart of man is evil from his youth. Which is, again, there's a lot going on over there. God promises to not curse again the land, ba'avur adam, because of man, for the inclination of the heart of man is evil from his youth. Noah brought a sacrifice. Sacrifice is a type of prayer. And God says, okay, we're going to change the policy. There's not going to be another flood. Now, what does it mean that God said, Ba'avur ha'adam, because of man, for the inclination of the heart of man is evil from his youth? What does that mean? So the Ramban explains what this means. He gives 2 interpretations. The first interpretation is Ba'avur ha'adam, it's because of Adam, of Adam. Who is responsible for all this corruption? There was corruption across the whole world. All flesh became corrupt. Why is there corruption? Universal corruption in the times of Noah. Why? It's all attributable back to Adam. If Adam hadn't eaten from that tree, from that fruit, there would be no corruption. So whose fault is it, ultimately, that there's human corruption? Ultimately, it goes back to Adam. So how can I destroy these people? How can I destroy these people when it's not really their fault? It's Adam's fault. That's the logic after the flood for why there will not be another flood. But guess what? That same logic could have forestalled the flood originally. If Noah brought a sacrifice before the flood, made a prayer before the flood, this very same argument after the flood that prevented a future flood would have prevented this flood. Because this prayer invoked the idea that how could you blame humanity? It's all Adam's fault. That's the first interpretation of the Ramban. Second interpretation of the Ramban is that how can you blame humanity? They have a yetzer hara that leads them astray. There are 2 arguments to exculpate humanity. One, it's not their fault. It's Adam's fault. Two, it's not their fault. They have a Yetzer Hara. How could you blame them? Both of those arguments were present before the flood. And if Adam just brought a sacrifice, made that argument, the flood would have never happened. Humanity had an ace up their sleeve. There was just no one to pray. Noah was busy with his hammer and his pitch and his gopher wood and all those intricate compartments. How many compartments are you going to make here? You need to make a boat that's big enough for all of the animals. Lots and lots of compartments. And you imagine that he had to wiggle between the different compartments, and probably we know that there were 3 different layers or levels. So you imagine there was a series of hallways and conduits and chutes and ladders. It's a very complicated engineering project. And Noah was very busy. But one prayer would have been enough to spare humanity. And that same prayer did spare humanity from a future flood. How could he blame them? It's Adam's fault. How could he blame them? They have a Yetzer Hara. If that argument was presented at the outset, the flood would have been avoided. And this is why our sages find so much to criticize in Noah, because he could have done it. If he just mimicked Abraham and Moshe, the flood would not have happened. And therefore, he is culpable. And therefore, he is an outcast like a Matzorah, and therefore needed to be in the floating purgatory for a year. I want to add one more point. The world became corrupted. And God told Noah, build a boat. The world's going to be destroyed. Take the animals. Take all the food. You'll survive, and you will ensure the continuity of created existence after the flood. So Noah brought a pair of every animal, and also 7 pairs of every kosher species. Why were there more kosher animals? Well, to offer sacrifices after the flood. Now, that's nice, an important idea. But why does that have to be brought into the ark? You want to offer sacrifices after the flood? I'll tell you what you do. You bring in 1 pair of all the kosher animals, and then they procreate, and then you wait 2, 3, 4 months or whatever it is, and you take a lamb and you slaughter it, the baby lamb. There's lots of things that you need for after the flood, right? You need to rebuild everything. So you don't take all that into the ark. That's for post-flood. There's a very deep point over here. Noah and co, they are responsible for the perpetuation of the world. There's this big reset button. It's called the flood. Noah, you're going to ensure that we'll be able to start over from scratch, and you have everything that you need over here on the ark with you. Well, what does that include? So all the food, all the plants, all the different species of animals. And Noah understood there's something else that needs to be perpetuated. It's not enough to have a world with all the different species of animal and plant. There's a spiritual dimension to the world as well. There's this notion, maybe it was a faint notion, that mankind must submit itself before God, subject itself to its creator, and offer sacrifices and offerings and tributes to him. That too must be perpetuated. And therefore, the 7 animals for the sacrifice that came after the flood, that too was part of the agenda of the ark. And Noah oversaw the ark with great dedication. For an entire year, Noah's managing the menagerie, and he's this portrait of kindness and self-sacrifice, giving and giving and giving. and together with the waters of the flood serving as a mikvah, he is rectifying the fundamental flaw of humanity. They became corrupted. They were taken from others. It's time to rectify by giving. Noah was this master class of kindness. He is stewarding the continuity of the world. But there was some aspect of the continuity of the world that Noah was not able to oversee. Chapter 7, verse 23. Noah remained alone. Vayishor ach Noach. Noach was alone. So what does that mean? So Rashi says it means he was alone. First interpretation. Second interpretation, based upon the Midrash, that Noah was coughing and spitting blood. He was suffering. He was damaged. He was injured. Why? Because the lion was once a bit late in being fed. And the lion took a swipe at Noah, and Noah remained, but he was barely. He was coughing and spitting blood. Very interesting idea. We know this idea. Noah was beaten up, was mauled by the lion. That was an amazing thing. Humanity is feeding all the animals, the tigers and the hippopotamuses and the rhinoceroses, and of course the lions, and they're running around, and the lions don't touch them, and the tigers don't touch them, and the hippopotamuses and the rhinoceroses, all these animals don't touch them. There's this harmony. The humanity is living in harmony with these animals. It's like a messianic utopia. The wolf and the lamb are dwelling peaceably together. And for a whole year, the lion doesn't do any damage. But at the end, Noah remained, he was barely alive because the lion mauled him. Why did the lion strike Noah? So there's a midrash. The midrash says that a lion never strikes a human unless he is thus instructed to do so from heaven. The lion swiped Noah. That was an instruction from heaven. And the commentaries tell us something very interesting. Noah brought animals into the ark. 1 pair of every non-kosher species. 7 pairs of every kosher species. And why did it bring more kosher animals? Well, that's for the sacrifice that he's going to offer after the flood. Now we know who offers a sacrifice. That's a priest. But there are some priests who are disqualified. If they are blemished, if they are an invalid, they're disqualified. Our sages tell us, when the lion struck Noah, he turned him into a blemished person, an invalid, and he invalidated him, disqualified him from offering sacrifices. So yeah, there were sacrifices brought, but who brought them? It wasn't Noah. It was Noah's son, Shem, who is, of course, called Malki Tzedek, Melech Shalem, and he is called a Kohen. He's a priest. He's a priest to God. God instructed the lion to maul Noah. Why? To disqualify him from offering the sacrifice. To make him blemished. He's not a priest. He cannot be a priest. Yes, there'll be a sacrifice that Noah's party will bring, but not Noah himself. He will not be able to oversee the actual sacrifice. His son will do it. And the deep point here is Noah, he's overseeing this project. What's the project? The continuation and perpetuation of the world, because the world had become corrupted. The world was impure. It was infected with the noxious impurity. And Noah, he's righteous in his generation. And he's going to be the continuator of the physical world. He's in charge of all the animals. He's the master of the boat. But the spiritual continuity, namely the sacrifices, he's not the right one. God says to the lion, go strike him. The spiritual continuity cannot be done by Noah. He's not the priest. You know what a priest does? A priest prays on behalf of their people. When someone kills accidentally, they go to the city of refuge, and they're there until the death of the high priest. Why does the death of the high priest release the accidental murderers, the Talmud tells us? Because the high priest is responsible for that event. Why? Because they should have prayed and they didn't. The definition of a high priest is someone who prays for their constituents. Noah, you didn't pray, you cannot be a priest. The lion was instructed to go strike him. Noah was invalidated. He's disqualified. Why? Because he did not pray for his generation. Abraham, he prayed. Moshe prayed. The high priest must pray. My grandfather, blessed memory, used to say, every parent, every person in a position of leadership must pray for their charges. Noah could have prayed. He could have saved humanity. And therefore, some of the blame can be laid at the feet of Noah. And in our Haftarah, it's called the waters of Noach. It's his fault. He was to some degree culpable. He needed to spend a year in the purgatory, 365 days, cleansing himself from what he could have done, from the sins of his incomplete righteousness. We start off the Torah, and we have two Parshas, and we have these very iconic personalities. We have Adam, this titanic personality, and there's something incomplete about Adam. And we have Noah, and something incomplete about Noah. And even though if any one of us were to examine Noah, we would not be able to find any faults in him, any flaws in him. The Torah calls him righteous. He was righteous. And if we had to measure him up and to assess him, we would think he's just absolutely righteous in every possible way. But Noah wasn't quite good enough. This is not the degree of perfection that the standard of the Torah demands. We're going to meet Abraham at the end of the Parsha. And Abraham, soon to be renamed Abraham, he is going to be the one who's going to begin this movement. And yes, Noah, in his generation, he played an important role. And again, we speak about Noah, we highlight all of his flaws, and we talk about what the sages tell us about him. Not to say that he wasn't righteous, he was. But our standards, the standards the Torah has, are for absolute perfection. And that was not accomplished by Noah. We have a fascinating take on what the purpose of the flood was, and the purpose of the ark was, and the role that Noah played. We see that the waters of the flood serve as a mikvah to purify, to cleanse the world. And Noah was forced to spend a whole year in this boat, and it's miserable. And we could have solved the problem. Just have the flood last for a day. Or have Noah and go to the land of Israel. No. We need to rebuild the world on the foundations of kindness. Idea number one. Idea number two, Noah could have saved humanity. And because he didn't, he is culpable to some extent for what became of them. And the waters are called the waters of Noah. And Noah, he is righteous in his generation. He's no Moshe. He's no Abraham. Abraham and Moshe, they show us how to behave in such a circumstance. Noah, he is like a Metzorah. Noah, he must be placed in purgatory. How long? For an entire year. Because the standards the Torah has are absolutely perfect. That's what the Torah wants. And that we don't get with Noah. we get with Abraham. That is some of the backstage discussion of Noah. And next week, please God, we'll read about Abraham. And who knows, maybe we'll discover something about Abraham that we didn't know from previous cycles. I enjoyed this exploration of Noah and the flood and the boat and the ark. And I'm looking forward, please God, to studying with y'all again next week. Again, we're meeting on Tuesday evenings for the Parsha podcast live on torchzoom.com at 6 p.m. You're welcome to join us if you haven't done so. And of course, the podcast will be released, please God, on Thursday morning or really late Wednesday night. Have a wonderful rest of your day. A fantastic and splendid and uplifting and meaningful Shabbos upcoming. Please God, with the help of the Almighty, we'll talk again next week. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.